While the woman excitedly discussed the birthday party with her daughter, her husband driving beside them suddenly nodded off. Sarah quickly turned to warn him, but it was too late. A car came barreling straight toward them. When she woke up in the hospital again, she rushed out of her room, desperate to find her husband and daughter. But her friend broke the news that both her husband and daughter had died in the crash. Their loss hit Sarah like a sledgehammer, shattering her world, and she spent her days drowning in grief. To help her escape the darkness, a few of her adventurous friends planned a cave expedition. They hoped the thrill of adventure would briefly distract Sarah from her inner pain. Before setting off, they took a group photo, and then headed toward the mountaintop cave as planned. Along the way, they excitedly talked about the adventure ahead, unaware that it would turn into a deadly nightmare. After gearing up, they followed the most experienced, Juno, toward the cave. But not long into their walk, they came across a giant deer, dead from a predator's attack. They paid it little mind, even excitedly taking a few photos around it. Soon they reached the cave entrance. To check the safety below, Juno slid down first. Once she signaled it was safe, the others followed one by one. They couldn't help but take in the stunning scenery around them. As they looked around, Sarah suddenly spotted a bloodied handprint embedded in the rock. Before she could process it, a swarm of bats flew out, making Sarah scream in fright. Fortunately, Juno quickly calmed her, explaining that bats were common in caves. Once Sarah settled down, they pressed deeper into the cave, which was pitch dark and incredibly narrow. They turned on their headlamps and used both hands and feet to feel their way through. After a long and grueling crawl, they finally reached a spacious chamber. Juno fired a flare to survey the surroundings, and as the darkness lifted, everyone grew excited again. They curiously examined the chamber, but Sarah suddenly heard a strange sound. Following it, she found it was just dripping water, and she breathed a sigh of relief. After a brief rest in the chamber, they continued deeper into the cave. The further they went, the narrower the passages became, barely wide enough for one person. Thanks to their experience, Rebecca and the others navigated the tunnel successfully. But when it was Sarah's turn, she got stuck, and the cramped darkness triggered her claustrophobia. Panic set in immediately, and her breathing grew rapid. Seeing the danger, Beth hurried back to calm Sarah, and with her help, Sarah slowly regained composure. Just as they prepared to move on, rocks above them suddenly loosened. Ignoring their backpacks, they rushed forward and narrowly escaped before the tunnel collapsed completely. With the entrance fully blocked, they had to find another exit to reach the surface, leaving them momentarily stunned. Luckily, they remembered the cave had 2 other exits, and hurriedly asked Juno for the guidebook. But Juno admitted she hadn't brought one, sending the group into panic. Worse still, this cave wasn't one of the developed ones they had planned to explore. It was a completely new cave Juno had found for the thrill, and rescue teams outside couldn't locate them through any records. This sudden turn of events sparked a fierce argument among them. To survive and make it back to the surface, they had no choice but to press forward, searching for another exit. After navigating around a pile of rubble, they found a passage, but not far in. Juno suddenly sensed something was wrong. She quickly called out to Sam ahead and fired a flare across the gap. The light revealed a sheer cliff ahead, with a bottomless abyss below. Their path back was blocked by fallen rocks. Crossing to the other side was their only chance to survive. With Sarah's backpack trapped in the tunnel, Rebecca had to rely on 2 pitons to make the traverse. She carefully wedged the pitons into cracks, and once secure, hooked the safety rope above. As Rebecca inched forward, she soon reached the center of the cliff. Just as she prepared to insert the next piton, she spotted an abandoned anchor bolt. Excited, she quickly hooked the rope onto it and swung herself onto the platform across. Sarah then tossed the remaining rope, creating a makeshift zip line, allowing the others to reach the opposite side safely. Since this was their only climbing gear, Juno had to bring it back after crossing. After Rebecca tightened the rope, Juno didn't hesitate to reach into the rock crevice. She had to support herself with her arms while retrieving the spare pitons. But as she finally reached the middle of the cliff, her hand slipped and she plummeted downward. Though they caught Juno, Sam's hand was shredded by the rope. To make matters worse, the only piton supporting Juno loosened, and she slammed against the rock face. Thankfully, her companions held her just in time, saving her from disaster and bringing her back to the platform. Once they caught their breath, they realized the piton was 100 years old. With no records of this cave outside, it meant whoever left it might have stayed here forever. Fearing to stop, they grit their teeth and pressed on deeper in search of an exit. Soon, leading the group, Beth spotted some drawings on the wall and quickly had Juno fire a flare. Under the light, they saw the drawings indicated another exit in the cave. Excited, they rushed forward, unaware that a creature was slowly emerging from a corner. Upon reaching a chamber, Juno used a lighter's flame to spot a tunnel leading outside. Seeing hope so close, Holly eagerly dashed into it. Even more fortunately, she soon spotted a sunlit passage ahead. Holly shouted for the others to follow, then excitedly ran toward it. But Juno urgently told Holly to stop, warning that it was just phosphorescent rock reflecting light. Holly, unable to stop, fell. But Juno reached her in time and grabbed her. The slippery rock made it impossible for Juno to hold on, and she helplessly watched Holly fall. Fortunately, the cave wasn't too deep, Holly broke a leg but survived. When the group reached her, they saw Holly's condition and had to carry her out of the water. To help her stand, they had to forcibly realign her broken leg. While tending to Holly, Sarah suddenly heard a strange noise nearby. Following the sound, she discovered a rusted helmet. Before she could process it, a shadowy figure flashed in the adjacent tunnel. Sarah shone her flashlight and saw a pale figure crouching there. Terrified, she turned and ran, only to find Juno suddenly behind her. Sarah insisted she had seen a man, but Juno thought it was just her nerves playing tricks. Despite her insistence, the others ignored her claim. They helped Holly crawl through the tunnel, and Sarah abandoned her doubts to follow along. Once they reached the top of the tunnel, they turned on their camera's infrared to survey the surroundings. Worse still, the area was inexplicably littered with animal carcasses, and a sudden chill swept over them. Fear took over, and they began blaming each other, even shouting frantically in all directions. As Juno tried to calm them, a creature suddenly appeared behind them. Before anyone could react, it reappeared on the rock wall above. Terrified, they shone their flashlights around, but the creature had mysteriously vanished into the darkness. Realizing the danger was closing in, they frantically crawled into a tunnel, but they hadn't gone far when the creature appeared again before them. In their panic, the frightened group fell to the ground, and the creature targeted the injured Holly. It lunged at Holly, biting her fiercely, then vanished again as she collapsed. Seeing this, Juno rushed to Holly, enraging the creature. It slammed Juno aside and prepared to drag Holly's body into the darkness. Refusing to let her friend become prey, Juno lunged at the creature, struggling for Holly's body. As her friend was nearly pulled into the darkness, Juno, in a panic, swung her ice axe frantically. The creature refused to let go, continuously attacking Juno. As Juno prepared another strike, a creature suddenly tackled her from behind. They struggled violently, and Juno couldn't break free, nearly getting bitten on the neck. In a desperate move, Juno grabbed a fallen ice axe and swung it with all her strength. Only when the creature finally went still did she stand, trembling with relief. Before she could recover, another noise came from behind, and Juno raised her ice axe in panic. But seeing the face, Juno froze. It was Beth, who had come to check on them. Watching her friend collapse, Juno trembled all over, her mind blank with fear. She couldn't bring herself to look at Beth and hastily ran into the darkness. Meanwhile, Rebecca and Sam searched for their companions with glow sticks, unaware of a creature lurking above. They soon reached a chamber blocked by boulders and had no choice but to hide along the rock wall. Meanwhile, Sarah, who had lost consciousness in the chaos, woke up and cautiously raised her camera to observe. The scene around her sent shivers down her spine. The ground was littered with the bones of various beasts. She quickly hid in a crevice, holding her breath, as Holly's body suddenly fell nearby. Before Sarah could react, countless creatures rushed out from the darkness, frenziedly devouring the body. The horrifying sight filled Sarah with overwhelming terror and nausea. Though she fought the urge to vomit, a faint sound escaped, instantly drawing the creature's attention. Luckily, the cave's perpetual darkness meant the creatures relied on sound, as their eyesight was poor. Faced with a creature only feet away, Sarah struggled to breathe in terror. Fortunately, Juno's distant calls drew the creature away. The creature first arrived in front of Sam and Rebecca, who held their breath, terrified to make a sound. Thankfully, it let out a roar and slowly moved away, giving them a sigh of relief. But as Rebecca tried to stand, her watch suddenly beeped sharply, drawing the creature's attention. Seeing the creature charging, Rebecca quickly removed and threw the watch, narrowly saving themselves. Meanwhile, Juno heard the watch called out and lured the creature away again. Sam and Rebecca completely ignored Juno's warning, hoping she could keep the creature distracted a little longer. Juno soon spotted the creature nearby and cautiously approached it with her ice axe raised. After escaping danger, Sam and Rebecca carefully climbed down, planning to flee while Juno kept the creature occupied. After confirming the path ahead was clear, they cautiously entered the tunnel. As Rebecca rounded a bend, a creature hidden in the rock wall suddenly attacked. Rebecca urgently told Sam to go first, while she swung her ice axe at the creature. In the panic, Rebecca failed to harm the monster, and was even thrown against the rock wall by it. Just as the monster opened its gaping jaws, an ice axe suddenly plunged into its body. With the monster letting out a pitiful screech, Juno slowly emerged from the shadows behind. She stepped forward decisively, snapping the monster's neck, and Rebecca finally came to her senses and ran to Juno. They anxiously asked about the others, but Juno hesitated, hiding the fact that she had accidentally killed Beth. Learning about their friend's death, they were immediately overwhelmed with grief and anger. Once they calmed down, Sam crouched to study the monster's features. They discovered that these humanoid monsters resembled bats. They had no sight and relied solely on hearing to hunt. The endless animal carcasses in the cave suggested that the creatures would hunt on the surface as well. If they could avoid these monsters, they would eventually find the exit. Fortunately, Juno had recently found route markers left by another expedition team. Rebecca and another immediately wanted to head for the exit, but Juno insisted they had to find Sarah first. Meanwhile, using her camera's infrared function, Sarah spotted some flammable materials among the nearby debris. Using her lighter and ice axe, she fashioned a makeshift torch. With the cave illuminated by the torch, Sarah cautiously searched for the chamber's exit. But before she could take 2 steps, a bloodied hand reached out behind her. She had stumbled upon a dying Beth. Seeing this, Sarah hurried over to comfort Beth and promised she would return with Juno to get her out. Beth insisted that Juno had hurt her and told Sarah not to trust her. When Sarah refused to believe her, Beth pulled out a talisman she had taken from Juno. Staring at the talisman, Sarah was stunned, and even worse, her husband's name was inscribed on it. Before Sarah could question any of it, the monster's roars erupted around them. Sarah hastily tried to pull Beth away, but the gravely injured Beth begged her to end her suffering. To spare her friend further agony, Sarah reluctantly raised a rock and struck it down hard. Then, a baby monster leapt onto her back, biting down firmly. Furious at the betrayal, Sarah unleashed her anger, throwing the creature to the ground and stomping on it. As she turned to leave, a female monster suddenly charged at her. Seeing the bloodied little creature on the ground, it let out an angry roar. Sarah hurriedly turned and fled, only to fall into a pool of monster blood. When she surfaced again, the monster was gone, and Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. As she turned to leave, the monster suddenly lunged at her, and they grappled fiercely. With the monster clinging tightly, Sarah could only hold its head with her hands. In a critical moment, Sarah grabbed a bone from the ground and thrust it into the monster's eyes. After dealing with the monster, distant roars echoed again, and another creature appeared. Luckily, Sarah had dropped low and held her breath, avoiding detection. As the monster moved to check on its young, Sarah seized the chance to smash it with a bone. Only when the monster stopped moving did Sarah throw her head back and scream, venting her rage. Elsewhere, hearing Sarah's screams, the others feared she was dead and hurried into the nearby tunnel. Just as Juno prepared to enter, a strange noise came from behind. Thinking it was Sarah, Juno quickly turned, only to see countless monsters swarming toward them. They hurried into the tunnel, but within a few steps, they were confronted with another cliff. As the monsters' roars grew louder behind them, Sam gritted her teeth and jammed her hands into a crevice. Despite the searing pain in her already injured hands, she forced herself to crawl toward the other side of the cliff. When Juno and another arrived, they quickly tried to stop Sam. The safety rope was too short to reach the other side, but Sam insisted on climbing, just as a monster suddenly appeared before her. Seeing the monster charge at her, Sam hastily drew a dagger, ready to fight. In the struggle, the monster tore Sam's neck, and she drove the dagger deep into it. As the monster lost strength and fell from the rock wall, Sam took her last breath. While Juno mourned Sam's death, a monster suddenly appeared and grabbed Rebecca. Although Juno rushed to intervene, the monster pinned Rebecca and began savaging her. Seeing her friend die before her eyes, Juno leapt off the cliff, determined to fight back. Fortunately, a subterranean river lay below, saving Juno from certain death. The monster that had fallen below suddenly revived, and the two grappled fiercely. At the last moment, Juno seized the dagger still lodged in the monster and drove it through, killing it. Surfacing, Juno grabbed the ice axe from her backpack and began climbing upwards. Just as she neared the tunnel, her grip slipped, nearly sending her falling, but Sarah appeared in time to save her. Before Juno could catch her breath, Sarah asked urgently about the others' whereabouts. After receiving a negative response, she pressed further, asking about Beth. Feeling guilty, Juno hesitated and admitted that Beth had died at the monster's hands. Hearing this, Sarah, who had doubts, finally accepted the truth about Beth. Yet, instead of seeking immediate revenge, she joined Juno in searching for a way out. Following the markers left by previous explorers, they entered a chamber, but as they turned, they saw 3 monsters guarding the exit, roaring furiously at them. With survival within reach, the two immediately lunged at the monsters. The pain of being bitten only fueled their adrenaline, making them even more determined. Juno swung the ice axe in fury, smashing the monsters, while Sarah pinned one's head to the ground with all her strength. As the chaos subsided, Sarah slowly picked up the ice axe and aimed it at Juno. Just as Juno looked at Sarah with hope, Sarah revealed the charm she was holding. Suddenly, a monster's roar echoed nearby, and with Juno's attention drawn away, Sarah struck Juno's leg with the ice axe, then turned and fled. When Juno pulled out her ice axe and turned to fight, countless monsters slowly appeared before her. Meanwhile, Sarah accidentally fell while searching for an exit and lost consciousness. When she woke up, sunlight was streaming through a cave opening ahead. Seeing hope ahead, she dashed toward the light, pushing aside dead branches, and finally emerged from the cave. She ran through the forest without hesitation, not daring to stop even when climbing into a car. Only after putting the cave far behind her did she stop, collapsing over the steering wheel in tears. When she finally calmed down, she was horrified to see a bloody Juno sitting beside her. Startled awake from what seemed like a nightmare, she heard monsters roaring nearby once again. What had started as a journey to heal wounds ultimately turned into a desperate nightmare of betrayal and hunting. In the abyss, the real terror was never the monstrous creatures. It was the darkness within human nature. Though Sarah survived the deadly ordeal, she emerged as bloodied and hardened as the monsters themselves.